Hey, hello everyone, my name is Dinesh Krishnan. In this video tutorial, we will be learning how to develop a RESTful API from the scratch using Spring Boot framework. During this tutorial, we will be learning three different phases. So, what are all those? We'll be learning how to set up the Spring Boot framework in our local environment to develop RESTful API. Obviously, the second phase would be the develop phase, where we will be learning and understanding and exploring the new API that are available in Spring Boot framework in order to develop RESTful API. The third phase actually deploy phase. Once our application is completely developed, we will be deploying that application into the cloud service. So there are a lot of things to cover. Let's quickly start. I'm going to show you how to create a simple Spring Boot application using IntelliJ community version. See, to do that, instead of actually creating the project from the IntelliJ, so the best option actually go to this particular link. So this is actually called Spring Initializer. The URL for that actually start.spring.io. Here you have to select a couple of options in order to generate the Spring Boot application. So what to do? So make sure what exactly do you want? So generate with a Maven project, actually Gradle project. Okay, I want a Maven project, and then you can select the language here. So let it be Java, since we're going to develop entire application using Java. So here you can see the Spring Boot latest version. So 2.1.1 snapshot is the latest. So, but I always recommend you guys to select the stable version, right? So now you can provide your group ID. So the group ID actually I'm going to choose com.dineshkrish. So provide the artifact ID. So the artifact I'm going to choose CMS, that is actually customer management system. So the dependency I'm going to add the web, right? So add the dependency. Once everything is done, just simply generate the project. Now you can see the CMS the Maven project actually generated. You can actually go to the download link. Let me actually put it here, right? I'm gonna unzip this particular Maven project here, right? So now what I'm gonna do, instead of actually going on a create option, I'm gonna import the project. So click on the import project. Now you have to select the project. See, my project actually available in C drive, user, Dinesh, desktop. You can see CMS, right? So just click on CMS. So once that is done, that is actually going to show you two options. So import project from the external mode, right? So I'm going to select Maven, since we are dealing with the Maven project, right? Next, then what you have, make sure that some of the checkbox actually enable. I'm going to say search the project from the recursively. Just actually click on it. Import the Maven project actually automatically, right? So let me give next. So once that is done, you can see our CMS application actually shown here, right? Give a next. So now let me simply give finish. I'm gonna give finish. Once you actually done a finish, now you can see that the project actually getting created. Now you can see that the project actually got created, right? Now in the project, if you look at it, you can find source folder and main folder. Everything actually we generated using Spring Initializer. We just imported that project into community version, right? Now let me simply go to CMS application. Just click on it. Now you can see one simple Spring Boot application is created. I just want to make sure that this is actually running properly or not. I'm gonna simply run this application. Let's see what is gonna happen. Okay, our Spring Boot application is getting started. Now we actually created the simple Spring Boot application using the Spring Initializer. We imported the project and we started successfully. We're going to learn how to create a simple Spring Boot project and run it in our local machine, right? So if you look at it, I have IntelliJ IDE with me. Here you can find option called create a new project. Just click on it. So when you click the create new project, you can see the pop-up which is actually giving you the multiple option. So now you can see one option called Spring Initializer. Now if you don't find the Spring Initializer, so probably you have to go to the settings of the IntelliJ and then you have to download the appropriate plugin. That is something is really possible. You can do that, right? So as of now, make sure that you have a Spring Initializer with you. Just give a next. So that is giving you another pop-up. So where you have to fill all the project metadata, right? So I have to fill few information such as group ID. I'm gonna name the group ID Dinesh Krish, and artifact ID is actually what, customer application. I'm gonna say what, I'm gonna call this application as what, customer application, or else I'll say customer management application. In short, I'm gonna call it as what, CMS. Now you can select the language. You can see the different language available. I'm gonna select it as what, Java, right? If you want, if you are very good at with the Kotlin syntax, you can use the Kotlin. So I'm going ahead with what, Java. Now you can actually select what, the Java version. I'm going to leave it as it is. So you can choose the version of your artifact. So CMS, then your project name. I'm going to call this project the description as what, customer management application, right? So now we all set. Just give next. Now here the place you can see the different modules that are available in what, the Spring Boot. Now you can see there are a lot of module, core, web, template engine. We'll learn everything one by one. So as of now I'm going to focus only on what, the web. So under the web you can see what, React Web, REST repository, a lot of things. I'm going to select only what, web for the initial one. So you can see the latest Spring Boot version is actually what, 2.10, which is stable. Now you can see one more snapshot version 1.2.1.1, which is the snapshot. So I always prefer you choose only what, the stable version, right? So just give a next. Now you can see the project name. So I'm going to name the project actually name as what, customer management application, right? So this is nothing to deal with your artifact name. Your artifact name is different, your project name is different. So just make your project name is more readable so that will be very easy for you to access. Right, just give a finish. Now you can see that the project actually created. It's actually what, download all the necessary dependency for your project. Now go just open the project structure. Now you can see what, external Maven library, right? Just click on it. You can see what, all the Maven libraries are added, right? So whatever is needed for the Spring Boot application. Now if you go inside, you can see there is a source folder. Inside the source folder you can see the main, then go to the Java. So you can see what, the package is created called com.dineshkrish.cms. So here you can see what, the one class is created called CMS application. Just click on it. Now you can see there is a simple class called CMS application which has the main method in it, right? Which has the main method in it, and then it is annotated with what, Spring Boot application. Right, leave it as it is. So because this is actually what, going to bootstrap the Spring Boot application. So that's what we are actually using this annotation. Spring application dot run. So then you have to pass what, your class. Then you are passing the argument. You are telling to your Spring container, hey Spring container, consider this class actually what, a main class for my Spring application. That's it. So now you can go to the POM XML, the artifact ID, group ID, the version. So now you can see the dependencies are, so the dependency that we added is what, group ID for org.springframeworks.boot, then Spring Boot starter.web, as well as the testing framework also is added, right? So this is the current status of the Spring Boot application. Now let's quickly run this application. We'll see what is going to happen. Now you can see that our Spring Boot application is getting started. Okay, so far we just created what, simple Spring Boot application, and then we ran that application, successfully. We just created the simple Spring Boot application and then we ran that application in the local environment. So now you would have noticed whenever the Spring Boot application is started, you can see the default banner of the Spring Boot application is a Spring. So now you may have a question, is there a way to customize the Spring banner? Yes, there is a way. So first of all, you have to generate what, the ASCII text. In order to generate the ASCII text, there are a lot of tools available in the online. Just go to the browser. Now you can visit this link, which can enable you to generate the ASCII text for the given input. I'm going to actually give the input as actually customer application, right? So I'm going to just give a submit. So now you can see what the ASCII text is generated for our customer application, right? Let me copy that ASCII text. Now go back to your Spring Boot application. Now you can see what, under the project, you can see the folder called source folder. Inside the source folder, you have folder called resource folder. In the source main, then you have a resource folder. Create a new file called banner.txt. right? Now just simply paste your customer application ASCII text. Now close this. Now let me stop this application. I'm going to rerun this application, right? Rerun your CMS application class. Here we go. Now you can see what the Spring Boot application is started with a new banner that we actually created, right? So this is how you can customize the default banner in a Spring Boot application. I'm going to show you how to create a simple Hello World example using Spring Boot framework. So since you can see that we already created the Spring Boot application called customer management application. So here we can find the package called com.dineshkush.cms, the customer management system. So I'm going to create one more package called API, right? So the package is created. Inside this package, I'm going to create a class called Hello World, right? So now you can see that we just created a class called Hello World inside the com.dineshkush.cms.api, right? So now what is the agenda of this example? So we are trying to print Hello World on the browser whenever we call hello URL. So how to achieve that? I'm going to create the method called say hello that is actually going to return a string, right? The access specifier of the method is a public. So whenever you call the say hello method, that is always going to return hello world, right? So now let's quickly understand how to call this hello world whenever we call the hello URL on the browser, right? So to do that, so you have to annotate your class as REST controller as and when that is added. Now you have to map the URL to this method. So when I say map the URL, I'm going to say whenever I call hello in the browser, so that has to trigger the say hello method, then whatever returns from the say hello method, that should be printed in the browser, right? So to do that, I have to use one more annotation called request mapping. So in the request mapping, so there is a property called value. So in the property, I'm going to say /hello. That means whenever I call /hello in the browser, you call this method. So whatever values gets written, just print the same in same on the browser, right? So now let's quickly run this application. Let me run that. Now you can see that our customer application, it's successfully started. Now go to the browser. I'm going to simply, so localhost 8080/hello URL that we created. Just simply give an enter. Now you can see hello world is printed on the browser. We're going to understand what exactly we're trying to achieve in our customer management application. Here you can see that there are the customer APIs is listed. So which actually shows different endpoints that we're going to use in our customer management application. When I say customer management application, we're going to manage the customer by doing several operations such as creating the customer, deleting the customer, updating the customer, and retrieving all the customer information, or else specific customer information. So you can see that the endpoints are listed over here. The get/customers, which is responsible for getting all the customers. The get/customer/ID, which is responsible for getting only the specific customer based on the given ID. The post/customers, which is responsible to create the customer based on the data that we're going to pass. The input/customer/ID, which is going to update the customer based on the customer ID that we provided. So, and the final is the delete/customers/ID, which is going to delete the customer, the ID that we passed. Let's stay tuned. We'll see how to develop these endpoints in the Spring Boot application. So let's quickly create the customer object that we're going to use it in our customer management system. So inside this package, I'm going to create one more package called model. So in the model package, I'm going to create the one more Java class called customer, right? So now we're going to decide what are all the attributes that we're going to add in our customer class. So I'm going to add private integer customer ID, then private string customer first name, then private string customer last name, then finally private string customer email. So let's quickly generate the getters and setters for it. So right click, generate. So I'm gonna generate the getters and setters. So generate getters and setters for all the field. So we generated. So we're gonna use this exact customer class in our customer management system. We're going to create a service layer. We're going to add the service layer into our existing Spring Boot application. Hey, what exactly the service layer? When I say service layer, that is actually going to contain the business logic for our application. So in our situation, what is the business logic for the customer management application? So typical grid operation for the customer data. So when I say grid operation, create, read, update and delete operation, for that we're going to create one service layer. We're going to have it in our application. So later we can incorporate that service into our API. Let's do that later. As of now, let's create the service layer. So we can see the base package called com.dineshquest.cms. That is customer management system. Inside that I'm going to create one more sub package called service, right? So service package is created. Inside that I'm going to create the class called customer service, right? The customer service class is created. Now what I'm planning to do this, I'm planning to actually add a couple of methods which can manage the customer information. So in this service class, I'm not going to connect this service class to the database. Maybe we'll be doing it in the later video. So as of now, consider we're going to use the normal list object in order to actually hold the customer information, and with that list object we will perform all the management operation, right? I'm going to create the list object. So private list. So make sure that you are importing from java.util package list. I want this list to be holding the customer object that we created, right? So that's from the model.customer class. Now I'm going to call them as customer list equal to new, copy on, write array list. Why we are using the copy on array list? Why not the normal array list? The normal array list is not really good for the concurrent operation. So I will tell you what exactly the concurrent operation in my later tutorial. As of now, just to use the copy on write array list instead of using the normal array list, right? So now we just created the simple customer list which is going to hold the customer object, right? So I'm going to add the method called add customer, which is nothing but going to create the customer. Inside the customer list, I'm going to pass the customer object to this method, and then I want this method to return the created customer object. Then I want this method signature to be public. Now what we're trying to do, we're going to add a customer. Whatever customer we receive, we're going to add that customer to this customer list. Okay, so how to do that? It's very simple, right? So customer list dot add, I'm going to pass the customer. So now before going to add a customer, so now I want the customer. If you look at it, if you go to our customer class, you can see the customer ID, right? We are not going to pass the customer ID. You can see the customer ID. We are not going to pass the customer ID in our request payload. We'll be passing only the customer first name, last name and email. I want this customer ID to be generated internally. We'll see how to do that, right? I'm going to create one more variable called private integer customer ID count, right, equal to 1. So now what I'm going to do, so whatever object that you pass, I'm going to pass customer dot set customer ID equal to customer ID count, right? Now we set the customer ID count to our customer object. Now I'm going to add this customer object into our list. Now I'm going to increment the customer ID count plus, then I'm going to return the same customer object that we have. Now if you look at it, the customer object will come without the ID. We are setting the ID before we're going to add it in our database. So as of now we are not using the database. I'm considering this is our database. We are adding into our list. Then we are passing the updated object as a response to what the particular request, right? Now we created the add customer method. Now we're going to see how to get the list of customer, right? So how to do that? It's very simple. Public, I want to send the list of customer, right? So list of customer. So I'm going to call this method actually get customers, which is going to return multiple customer. I'm simply going to return the customer list that we have already, right? So it's a very simple implementation. Now consider I want to retrieve only the specific customers. Now how to do that? Public, I'm going to return only one customer. So customer, I'm going to call this method actually get customer. Get customer. Here I just want to pass what is the customer ID, right? So that they can pass the customer ID, then to the list. From the list we can filter that particular customer ID and then we can send it as response for the particular request. So how to do that? So we have already the customer list with us. Now we have something called stream API that is actually part of Java 8 onwards, the stream, right? So I'm going to use the stream dot, I'm going to say filter. So what I'm going to say, customer c dot get customer ID if it is equal to the customer ID that we passed, then find first, then get. The find first actually going to return the optional object. From the optional object I'm getting the actual object. I'm returning that object as what? A response to this particular method, right? So we actually did get customer as well. So far we just added a few methods that is actually going to add a customer, get the list of customer and get the specific customer. Now let's add few more functionality to our customer service layer. So what is that? I'm going to add the method called update customer, which is let us to actually update the specific customer from the list. So I'm going to pass two arguments. One is actually the customer ID needs to be updated and then the customer information that we want to update, right? So I want this method to return the customer object, whatever updated customer object, I want that customer object to be written in this method. We just created update customer method. Now we're going to find the customer from the list, then we're going to update the customer, then whatever information is updated, that information we're going to return in this method. Now let's see how to do that. Customer list dot stream dot, I'm going to do for each, then I'm going to say if the c dot get customer ID it is equal to the customer ID that you pass, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to update the information such as customer first name. So I'm going to get that information from the object that we are passing, customer dot get first name, then I'm going to do it for what? Set last name. So get the last name, then I'm going to set the email, then get the email, right? So we just updated all these information except ID. Then we're gonna return the updated customer. So how to do that? Customer list dot stream dot filter. I'm gonna pass filter customer dot customer ID equal to customer ID that we pass. Then here I'm gonna do find first. The find first is actually going to return the optional customer object. From the optional I'm gonna get the customer object. I'm gonna return that. So our update customer logic is actually fine, right? So we have a customer list. So from the customer list we are actually finding the customer that needs to be updated. We actually update all the information, then we're going to return actually that updated customer information to the particular request, right? Now let's see how to delete the customer. I'm going to add a new method called delete customer which is actually going to take the customer ID that needs to be deleted from the list. I'm not going to return anything for this method, so I want this method to be public, right? So now very simply I'm going to do customer list dot stream dot for each. Then I'm going to simply, if the customer dot get ID equal to ID that we passed, I'm gonna simply do what? Customer list dot remove the specific customer. That's it, right? So this particular method is going to delete the customer based on the ID that we passed. We're going to learn how to create a customer using what, the post mapping annotation, right? So now you can see what, we already created the Spring Boot application. We even added what, the service layer to our application. So this service layer typically going to handle all the customer related activities, such as adding the customer, getting the customer, updating the customer, and deleting the customer. Now I'm going to create one class under the API package, the class name called customer resource, right? So the class is actually created under the package called com.dineshchris.cms.api. I'm going to annotate this class with a REST controller. Then I'm going to add one more annotation called request mapping. In the value attribute, I'm going to say /customers. That means, so whenever the client requests with this particular endpoint, this class should be triggered. So now what we are trying to do, we have to create the customer. So in order to create the customer, so what is the corresponding HTTP method? It's a post method, right? So in order to do that in the Spring Boot application, we have to use post mapping annotation. So after do that, I'm going to create a method called public. So that has to return the customer. So whatever customer is created, right? I'm going to add the customers. I'm going to call this method actually what, add customer, right? So let me import this class. So from the model package that we created, right? So now if you look at it, we already have what, all the business logic in place. I'm going to use this particular class in my resource class. So how to do that? So you have to create the reference variable of the class. I'm going to say private customer service. I'm going to inject this customer service to my resource class. So how to do that? So let me do what, auto wire. In order to use the auto wire annotation on top of the customer service class, so before we going to do that, you have to make sure your customer class is actually annotated with the annotation called component. So when you do that, now you can see what, our error actually is gone. Now you can use this particular customer service in your resource class. So now we actually got an access to what, this customer service class. So I'm going to simply do return customer service dot add customer. The add customer is a method which actually takes what, customer object as an argument, right? So I have to pass what, customer to this particular method. The same object I'm going to pass it to what, the add customer as well, right? So now whatever this add customer is returns, I'm going to return same as what, my response. So now if you look at it, how are we going to get this customer object from the user, right? So whoever going to call this API. So in order to do that, we have to use annotation called request body. So if you use the request body annotation, you can actually pass the customer JSON. So customer JSON will be converted into what, the customer object. The same object can be passed into what, our customer service add customer method. I'm going to annotate this particular method as what, the post mapping. Now we successfully created what, add customer method, which can be exposed as what, API. We just added a post mapping in our customer resource class. It's time to check whether it's working or not. In order to do that, yes, of course, first of all, we have to start the application. So just go to what, CMS application, right click and run the CMS application. Now you can see that our customer application is started. Go to the Postman tool where you can test what, your REST endpoint, right? So what is our REST endpoint? Our REST endpoint is the customers, right? That is running in the localhost colon 8080 port, right? Since we are dealing with the post mapping, so your HTTP request method should be what? Post, right? So now if you look at it, our post mapping actually mapped with the add customer method, which actually takes customer object as an argument, right? So we have to send this customer object in the request body. So now go to your postman, you can find option called body, click on it, raw, then select JSON. Now we're going to send the customer object as a JSON to this particular endpoint, right? How to prepare the customer object? I'm going to prepare the customer object with the following attribute, right? We can find all these attributes available here: customer first name, last name, and email. We're not going to pass the ID because we are generating the ID internally, right? So now customer first name, I'm going to pass the first name as actually Dinesh. Then customer last name, the last name is actually Krishnan. Then the customer email is dinesh@dineshkrish.com, right? Now let's quickly send this request to this particular customer endpoint. If it is successfully executed, we should receive the customer object as a response with a generated ID. Let's see whether it's happening or not. Here we go. We got the successful response with a generated customer ID. We successfully created a customer and added into the list, right? Now let's see how to retrieve all the customer as well as the specific customer by passing the customer ID. So in order to do that, I'm going to create one method called getCustomers, which is going to return the list of customer object. The method is public, right? So I'm going to call return customer service dot get customers, right? So in order to publish this API, so I have to use the annotation call get mapping, because this is get request. We're going to retrieve all the customers list, right? Now consider we can retrieve all the customer. Now there is a scenario, I want to retrieve only the specific customer by passing the customer ID. So I have to do that. So public customer, I'm gonna name this method actually customer, get customer. So here I'm gonna use again a get mapping, but in this case I'm gonna pass the URL as customer ID. So what exactly this one, when you call a /customers with the get request, you will receive all the customer. When you call /customers/ID, the particular customer ID you pass, you will receive only the single customer object. So now in order to achieve that, you have to pass integer customer ID, right? So now what you have to do, in order to receive this customer ID from the request and store it into this customer variable, you have to use annotation called path variable, right? In the path variable, I have to mention customer ID. The same name, you have to mention it over here, right? Now return, I'm going to call the customer service class, get the customer, then pass the customer ID, right? Now we successfully added two methods in our customer resource. One is going to retrieve all the customer, another one is going to retrieve the specific customer based on the customer ID, right? Let me quickly run this application. We'll see whether it's working or not. Here we go. Our customer application is started successfully. Now go to your postman. I'm going to add a customer first, right? So call the post method. So now you can see one customer is added. Let me add one more customer, Robert John. The mail ID is robert@dineshkrish.com, right? Let me hit. You can see two customer is created. Now let's check whether we are getting the customer list or not by calling the get method. If you call localhost 8080/customers, you should receive the list of customers, right? Great, we are receiving the list of customer. Now let's see whether we are able to receive one customer by using the specific customer ID, right? I'm gonna pass customer ID as 2. Let me call this API. Here we go. We able to get specific customer also by using customer ID. As of now, we can able to create the customer
and retrieve the customer from the list using our REST endpoint. Now let's quickly understand how to update the customer using the put mapping in a Spring Boot. So how to do that? In order to do that, I'm going to create this simple method called update customer, which is going to return the updated customer. Then method should be public. So this particular update customer has to pass two arguments. One is actually the customer ID, then customer object that's need to be updated, right? I'm going to annotate this particular method as put mapping. So here I'm going to pass value, I'm going to pass slash customer ID, right? So here I'm going to receive this customer ID from the path parameters. So I have to annotate it as path variable, right? Then I have to specify the customer ID. Then this customer object I'm going to retrieve from the request body. So I have to annotate it as the request body, right? So both are done. So I'm going to simply pass it to my customer service class. So customer service class dot update customer, I'm going to pass the customer ID that we have, then customer object that we have, right? So whatever it's written, we're going to return same as a response to the particular request, right? So let's quickly check whether it's working or not. So let me run this application. Now go to the Postman. So now what is our first step? We have to add a customer, right? So in order to add the customer, I'm going to add the customer. I'm going to add Dinesh K. The mail ID is Dinesh, right? So let me add the customer. Now you can see the customer is added successfully. Now let's retrieve the customer. So now you can see in the customer list we have only one customer. Let me pass the specific ID. Now you can see the single customer object is retrieved. Now what we are trying to do, we have to update the customer, right? So to do that, I'm going to actually do put mapping. Let me actually copy this all object, right? Let me go to the body. I'm going to pass. So already we have this body available. I'm going to pass Dinesh. Instead of K, I'm going to pass Dinesh Krishnan as a last name. Then I'm going to update the mail ID as dinesh.krishnan@dineshkrish.com. Let's quickly run this method. We'll see what is going to happen. Now you can see our updated customer object actually written to us. Now let's quickly run, get the complete customer object. Now you can see we can get the customer list with the updated information. Let's quickly understand how to use the delete mapping in order to delete the customer in the list, right? So to do that, I'm going to create one method inside our customer resource class. The method name is delete customer, right? So the delete customer method, which is actually going to take the customer ID as an argument. I don't want this method to return anything, so void, then the method should be available publicly, right? I'm going to annotate this method as delete mapping, right? And then in the value attribute, I'm going to pass the path param as customer ID. The same we have to set it in the customer ID variable. So I have to do that. So path variable, I have to pass customer ID, right? So now we have a customer service class, customer service dot delete customer. Then we have to pass the customer ID. Now let me see whether this is working or not. Let me run this application. Cool, our application is started successfully. Let's go to the Postman. Now we have to create the customer. Let's create the customer. Cool, the customer is created. Now let's retrieve the customer. Yes, we have list of customer. In the list we have only one customer available. Now let's see. Yes, we are able to receive the single customer. Now I'm going to delete this customer by invoking the delete HTTP method, right? So now I'm sending deletes request to this endpoint, right? The customer / the customer ID. Now you can see we are not getting any response because we are not sending any response for this particular request. In order to make sure whether our customer object is deleted or not, just go back to your get. Now simply actually what? Get the customer list. Now you can see what? There is no customer object is available. That means our customer object is deleted successfully from the list. We're going to understand how to use JSON property annotation in order to customize the JSON field in a Spring Boot application. Now consider we are sending what JSON in our request body, so which actually contains what? The customer first name, customer last name, customer email ID, which is equivalent to what the class attribute that we have, right? I don't want to expose my attributes name to what? The client. Instead of that, I want to customize this. The same I want to share it to my client. So how to do that? So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to customize this all field by using the annotation called JSON property, right? In the JSON property, instead of customer ID, I'm going to mention it is the ID, right? Let me copy this line. Let me add in all top of the attribute. So instead of customer first name, I'm going to say what? First name. Instead of customer last name, I'm going to customize it as what? Customer last name. Instead of customer email, I'm going to say what? Email, right? So now let me simply run these applications. We'll see what is going to happen. Here we go. Our customer application is started successfully. Now let's go to what? Our Postman. So instead of sending the first name, I'm going to send what? First name. So that is the new customized name, right? So instead of customer last name, it's going to be the last name. Instead of customer email, it's going to be only email, right? So let me simply send this request body to this particular endpoint. Let's see whether we are receiving what? The customized field as a response or not. Here we go. Now you can see what? The ID, first name, last name and email, it was previously different, right? Now we customized it using what? At the JSON property annotation in Spring Boot. So far we just created a simple Spring Boot application which can manage what? All the customer information, such as we are performing all the grid operation against what? The customer information. So but we are not using what? Database in our application. We are just using what? The list object. We are considering the list object is the place where we can store the customer and for the later management activity, right? So instead of the list object, we're going to replace the database. So now let's see how to do that. So if you go to the POM XML, so you have to add a few dependency in order to enable the database in a Spring Boot application. So what is the dependency about, right? So I'm going to add what? The new dependency, the dependency. So the group ID should be what? org.springframework.boot. Copy that and paste it over here. If you go to the artifact, you can see what? All the available artifact, right? So in the available artifact list, you have to select spring-boot-starter-data-jpa. So just select that. Let's do what? Import changes. I want all this dependency to be imported in our Spring Boot application. Once that is done, just go back to what your CMS application. Let me simply run this application. We'll see what is going to happen. If you look at it, our application is trying to get started. So but we are finally end up with what? Some error. If you see the error very closely, you are telling to your Spring Boot application, I want to use a database, but you are not telling to your Spring what database you are exactly going to use. There are a lot of databases available in the market. You have MySQL, Oracle, MS Office SQL Server, you have MongoDB, you have lot of database, right? Now you just mention only you want to use what? The JPA dependency, right? Now the JPA dependency actually complaining. So what is the database you're going to use? So I'm ready to what? Use the JPA. But on top of which database? So now you have to select the database. As part of this tutorial, I'm not going to use any MySQL Oracle database. I'm going to use what? Few embedded databases available in the market called either H2 or HSQL or else what? Derby. So I'll prefer what? H2. So just go to what? The Maven repository. Simply type what? H2. Now you can see what? The H2 database engine dependency. I'm selecting the latest one. Copy this dependency. Go to what? Your POM XML. Simply add the dependency. If you look at it, we added what? The H2 dependency, but by default set as what? Test. that means this one will be available only in the testing phase. No, I don't want this particular H2 database as what, the whole database in my application, right? So if you want to do that, just remove the scope. Now go back to your application. Now let me simply run this application. We'll see what is going to happen. Okay, it's getting started. Here we go. Now you can see what, our application is successfully started, because you are telling to your Spring Boot, hey Spring, I wanted to use a JPA dependency then on top of the H2 database. You actually fulfilled all the criteria. That's what is not throwing any error. We learned how to add a database to our Spring Boot application. We're going to learn how to introduce the GRUD repository in order to do GRUD operation on top of the database. Let's see how to do that, right? So before going to do that, I'm going to create the package, new package called DAO, that is a data access object package. Inside this package, I'm going to create the new interface. I'm going to select the interface. I'm going to call this interface actually customer DAO. So that's my interface, right? So the interface is created. So now this interface has to extend the other interface called GRUD repository. You can see that the GRUD repository actually takes two arguments, two generic type. One is actually the type of the class that we're going to deal with, and then the unique ID of the class. We'll discuss what is that. So obviously since our application is the customer management application, we have customer class with us. So I'm going to mention customer class. Now let me import the class. Okay, I imported the class. Now if you go and see inside the customer class, so what is the ID for this customer class, right? We are considering the customer ID is the unique value for what? Our customer records, right? So now we have to mention, so what is the type of the customer ID? So it is integer, right? So I would say my ID type is actually integer, right? So now we created this. After doing this one, you have to annotate this interface as actually repository, right? So once that is done, we have to do few modification in our customer class. So we have to convert this customer model class as the entity. So I have to do that. So you have to annotate it as actually entity. So make sure that the entity class from JavaX dot persistence API, JPA package. Then you have to mention in my entity at least one attribute should be the primary key, right? So the primary key can be represented using the ID attribute. Make sure that you are selecting everything from JavaX dot persistence API, right? So then I want this ID to be generated. If you look at our customer service class, we are kind of actually starting with a customer ID count as a 1. Then we are increasing the customer ID based on each and every insertion. But when we are trying to perform the database operation, obviously that customer ID should be generated implicitly, right? So I have to achieve that. So for that, you have to use the annotation called generated value. Inside the generated value, you have to pass a property called a strategy equal to, then the strategy equal to auto. When you say auto, I want this particular customer ID should be generated automatically whenever I'm trying to perform the insertion, right? So we created the interface, we extended the GRUD repository, then we added what is the type of the class that we are dealing with, then the ID type of the particular entity, right? So everything is done. Now what we have to do, let me actually introduce one more annotation. So if you go to your Spring Boot a main application, you have on top of the Spring Boot main application, you have to introduce one more annotation called enable JPA repository. Please make sure that you use this one, because we're going to use the JPA related, because we're going to perform the JPA related activity. You have to tell your Spring Boot that I want you to enable JPA repository things in order to perform the activity, right? So let me select that. So these are all the changes you have to do. So once everything is done, I'm simply going to run this application. Hold on, we had to actually do the logic changes. As of now, we are not doing any insertion, updation, deletion logic on the database. We will be doing it later. So I just want to make sure that all the configuration are fine. If the fine in the sense your application should be started successfully without any hiccups. Let's see what is going to happen. Now you can see what our application is started. That means whatever configuration we did so far, it's actually correct. We just added the grid repository and then its related configuration. So you can see our application is started successfully. Now it's time to do the database related activities such as create, update, delete and wait. Let's see how to do that. Let me start this application. So go back to your customer service class, because here the place we have to do all the customization, right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm simply going to inject this customer DAO interface. Let's see how to do that, right? So private customer DAO, right? So that has actually all the DAO logic. So customer DAO, I'll call them as a customer DAO. Now I'm gonna do auto wire. So I want my Spring to, hey Spring, please give me the implementation, right? The default implementation, so that I can perform the grid operation on top of my database, right? So to do that, the first step, we want to insert the record. When I say insert the record, obviously we're going to create the record, right? So here, if you look at it, this is the method who's currently responsible to add the customer into the list, right? Now instead of list, we want to add it into database, right? So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually I'm actually going to comment this code out for a while. Here we have to return the customer, right? So here we don't have to generate any ID or something, because that ID would be generated automatically since we used to ID annotation as well as the generated value annotation, which is responsible for generating the primary key for each and every customer object. So we don't have to really worry about that. So what we have to do here, I have to say that, hey customer DAO dot, I have to save the customer data. So let me simply call the customer data. Let me save that. So here I'm going to return the customer updated customer value. That's all. Let me comment this code out. Very cool, right? We don't have to write any too much of code in order to do that, right? So we removed all the existing code. We just added only one line that is very straightforward. Just to get the data, simply insert into the table. That's it, right? So now the same is applicable. So once the data is inserted, I just want to make sure that we able to get this data, right? Get all the customer list. How to do that. So here what I have to do, I have to customer dot find. There is a method called find all method. So if you look at it, the find all method actually returns the iteratable customers. But our expectation we want to return list object to our clients, right? So how to do that, in order to avoid this one, so what we have to do, you have to go back to your customer DAO interface. You have to override the find all method. So I'm going to say that find all method should return list of customer instead of iteratable customer object, right? So we overridden that method. Now what I have to do, go back to your customer service. I'm simply going to say return customer list. That's it. You can comment this line out. Obviously this line is not needed. So now let's quickly check whether these two functionality are working or not, right? As of now, what we did, we just added the customers. We can get all the customer list, whatever it's added, right? Let's check whether these two things are actually working in our application. Let's go to your CMS application. Let's simply start the application. We'll see whether the changes are working properly or not. Cool, the application is started successfully. Now go to your Postman, right? I'm simply want to insert the application, right? So far this particular insertion were happening on top of the list. Now we're going to try with the database. Let's see what is going to happen, right? I'm simply going to send this one. Cool, we are not getting any error, right? You can see that our customer object is created in the database, right? Let me do it again. So you can see there is one more record is added. 3, 4 and 5. You can see the 5 record is added. Now let me call what the get method, because we customize two logic, right? One is about adding the customer, another about what getting all the customer. Let's see whether whatever customers are inserted in the database, we were able to get all the customer list or not. Cool, we can receive what? All customer data that we inserted. Just inserted and received all the customer information. Now let's quickly do what? Another operation. So go back to our application. I'm going to stop this application. So let me go to the customer service class. So now here, what I'm going to do, we actually customize the add customer as well as what get all customers. So now I'm going to customize what the get specific customer information. So how to do that? Let me comment the old logic. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to introduce customer DAO dot. I'm going to call the method called find. You can see there is a method, predefined method, which is very handy. You simply have to pass what the customer ID. Since already we have a customer ID with us, you can pass what the customer ID that actually returns what optional customer. See, optional actually what it's a API. It's a class. What exactly it will do in the sense, because when you call this particular method, if you pass what 1, you probably receive what the particular customer. If you pass 100, consider if the customer is not available, since what you will not get any null object, right? So in order to handle the null effectively, there is a API called what the optional API. So you can leverage that as part of what Java 8. You can refer that in the Java 8 documentation. You'll get a clear idea, right? So here I'm going to call this method. I'm going to pass what the customer ID, right? The customer ID. When I pass the customer ID, that is going to my database. That will fetch what that particular specific customer by using what ID. Why? So now this is going to return us actually what the optional object, right? From the optional object, I want to get the customer object, right? So to do that, you have to call the get method. So the get method will give you what the customer object. The same object you can return as part of what the response, right? So we did what the customization for get specific customer record as well. Now let me go to what delete. Finally we'll go to what the update one, right? So let me go to what delete. See, in the delete, what I'm going to do, I'm going to what comment this code. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to call my customer DAO dot. I'm going to simply do what? You can see that there are methods available. If you want to delete the entire customer by passing the object, you can do that. By passing the ID, yes, you can do that. So our method is about what passing the ID, right? So I feel that this method is more suitable for our requirement, right? So let me call this method delete by ID, pass what the customer ID. So let me pass what the customer ID. So I'm going to pass what the customer ID that we have. That's it, very simple. So we customized what the delete logic as well as what the get specific customer logic, right? Let me quickly run this application. Let's test whether this is working fine or not. Here we go. Our application is getting started and it started successfully. Now let's go back to what our Postman tool. I'm going to perform the insertion. Okay, I'm going to insert the record customer 1, inserted 2, inserted 3, inserted 4, 5. We inserted 5 customer totally. Let me get what the specific customer. I want to get all the customer. Let's see. Cool, I'm getting all the customer. Let me see whether we can get the specific customer record. Cool, I can get what the specific customer. I'm going to perform the delete operation. Now I'm going to delete what the specific customer, the customer ID actually what 1. Let me do that. Cool, that you can see what the status is 200. That means the operation actually happened successfully. Let me go to what the get method again. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the list of all the customer. We have to make sure we should not have what 1 customer 1. Now you can see that the customer 1 is deleted successfully from the database. We almost performed all the operation except update. Let's see how to do that now. So go to what your IntelliJ. I'm going to stop this application, right? So go to what your customer service class. You can see we updated all the method, but except what the update method, update customer method, right? I'm going to comment the existing logic. I'm going to introduce what the new logic which is going to do what database related activity. So I'm going to pass what I'm going to call customer, a customer DAO. Do you have any method for me to update the object? Yes, it has. If you see that, you can't find any update method. Methods start with update, but you can see there is a method called save. You can ask me the question, save is to create or update. So you can consider the save method is for both operation. When you pass what the ID, customer ID along with your request object, right? So that would be considered as the update operation. When the ID field is missing, that would be considered as what the insert operation. Save can be used in both the operations such as what insert as well as update. So we already have the customer object. I'm going to pass what the customer object to save the to update the customer object, right? So but the thing is, we are not actually what sending the customer ID in the customer object, right? So now what we have to do, whatever customer ID we receive, right, we have to pass that customer ID, set that customer ID to this object. That's it. So this is the one change we have to do in order to do what the update operation, because the save method can be used in the both the operation as we discussed. So it can be used in what update as well as what insert. When the ID is not present, it is considered as what insert. When the ID is present, it is actually considered as what update. Since the current object that we are passing will not have the ID, you can see what the put payload that we have, right? We are not actually what passing any ID, but we used to pass what ID in the path parameter, right? So whatever ID we pass in the path parameter, so that will come here. I want to pass the same ID what to the customer object that we pass. So when this customer object reaches what this particular method, it actually what has an ID, so it will perform what the update operation. Let's see whether it's working fine or not. I'm going to run this application. Here we go. Our application is started successfully. Now let's go and test whether this is working fine or not. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create the customer first. I created the customer, right? I created what one more customer. So I have two customer with me. Let's see whether we are getting all the customer. Cool. I'm getting what two customer. So now what is the major operation? I want to perform what the update operation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take what this object. I want to update this information. Call the put method. So I want to update what the 2, pass 2, right? Go to what body. So here instead of Dinesh, I'm going to say what that guy name is Robert. Instead of Krishnan, I'm going to say what John, right? So instead of Dinesh Krishnan, I'm going to say what Robert dot John, right? So let us check whether this is actually getting updated or not. Here we go. Now you can see what it's got updated. Now let's go back to what our get customer. Let's retrieve all the customer list. We'll see. Yeah, here we go. Now you can see what our customer record, our customer ID 2, all the record actually what has been updated successfully. We successfully added and we performed all sort of grid operation on top of the database. But you may have one question with me. Every time whenever I start and stop the application, I'm kind of losing the data, right? So why is it like that? Can we make the data actually what permanent? That means whenever, even though I stop the application, when I restart the application, still I want the data to be permanent. So how to do that? So to do that, you have to do a few configuration in your Spring. Let's see how to do that. So go to what a Spring project. I'm going to start the Spring project, right? So now go back to the file called what application.properties. That you should see it in what the main folder. Under the main folder, you should something called what resource folder. Under the resource folder, you can find what application.property file. If you don't have this application.property file, please create one, right? So here you have to do two configuration in order to make your data what permanent in the H2 database. So how to do that? So spring dot data source dot URL. Now URL you have to give it as what, JDBC colon h2, that is h2 database colon tilde symbol slash the database name. I'm going to keeping database name as what, test. Then semicolon. I'm going to say what, DB close on exit, right? Whenever equal to false. So that means whenever the application actually get exist, please don't close the DB. Still I want the DB to be on. That's what here you are setting the flag as what, false. So DB close on exit equal to what, false. So apart from that, we have to enable one more configuration, spring.jpa hibernate dot DDL equal DDL-auto. I should made it as what, update. Hey, what is the DDL? DDL is nothing but data definition language. So that means that whenever our Spring application is started, it will create all the necessary table. So what I want the table to be created only in the first time. So whenever I restart the application again and again, please don't recreate that. If it is already created, discard that. That's what I'm keeping it as what, update. So with this information, so these two configuration is more enough, right? Now, so before I'm gonna start the application, I would like to clean up this code. Let me clean up the entire code. We don't need. Let me make it very straightforward. So we don't need this. We don't need this. So we don't need this, obviously. Right? So we don't need this as well. So let me format this code. Now we actually cleaned up, which is looks very straightforward. We don't have unnecessary code. We removed everything. Now we did the configuration to make our data more permanent. Now let's actually start this application. We'll see whether that change is actually working fine or not. Here we go, our application is started successfully. Now let's go back to this one. I'm gonna insert the few records. Now you can see the records which is already inserted, it's still available. Let me actually get this information. Now you can see the data actually coming in, right? Let me stop this application, right? Even though we stop the application, the database will not stop. Still that would be running, right? So now let me rerun this application. Okay, the application is started. I'm gonna simply get all the customer. So we should receive the data, right? So here we go. We receive the existing data as well. So we successfully configured in our Spring application saying that we need the data to be permanent. I don't want to lose the data every time start and stop. We're going to understand how to handle the exception in Spring Boot application. So when I say exception, consider we are already created the customer application. We added few customers into our database, right? So when I get the customer list, I can get all the customer, right? So let me get the specific customer by passing the ID, since we have already API in place. So we can get the specific customer ID. Consider, so what happen if I request the customer which is not present in the database? So if you run it, so you'll end up with some errors. Now if you look at it, the status code actually says 500, which it seems to be internal server exception. So when you go to the application and see the log, you can see that there is exception is occurred. It says clearly that there no value present in the database, right? So now we going to understand how to handle this situation in our Spring Boot application. So now let's stop this application. I'm actually going to create one package called exception. So inside the package, I'm going to create one class called customer not found exception. Very simple. So now you can see that we created the class under this package. Now this class has to extend the exception called runtime exception. So here I'm going to create the constructor which actually going to take the string message as an argument. I'm going to say that super of password, the message that we have, right? So now we created what simple customer not found exception which extends what runtime exception. Now I'm gonna annotate this exception class as what response status. In the response status, I'm gonna say what the HTTP status code equal to not found, right? So very simple. So I'm gonna say what this exception, it's associated with what 404 error, right? So when you say HTTP status dot not found, so that's nothing but what the 404 error, right? So now in my customer CMS application, so where we are handling all the customer fetching everything, so we are handling in what the customer service class, right? So go to what customer service class. Here if you look at it, we have what this method. So if you look at it, we have what the customer get customer method which takes customer ID as an argument. So now I'm just simply going to introduce one specific logic. It's gonna say that if the customer, so let me actually what copy this logic, right? I'm gonna put the logic somewhere here. Okay, I'm gonna remove the get method, right? So I'm gonna say that, let me put it into it what the optional. So it's going to read in what optional. So I'm gonna say what optional customer, right? So I'm gonna say what optional customer. Let me save this. I'm gonna pass this optional customer dot get method, right? So here what we're going to do, we actually what storing this information into what this optional customer reference variable. Now what I'm going to do, if the optional customer is not present in the sense, I'm simply going to throw an exception such as customer not found exception by passing what customer record is not available, right? Let me save this. Let me simply run this application. We'll see what's going to happen. Here we go. Our application is started successfully. Now go to what our postman. I'm going to simply request. Let me request what the full customer list. Make sure that the data still is available. Yes, we have only 4 record. We don't have the customer ID with a 50. So I'm going to pass what the customer ID which is not available. Previously we used to receive what 500. And now we received what 404 error which is not found, and it clearly says that customer record is not available. So this is how you can handle the exception. So if you go to what the application side, you can see what there is no internal error at all. We successfully handled the exception. Now it's time to understand how to customize this error message, right? So in order to do that, just go to what IntelliJ. Let me start this application. So I'm gonna introduce what one more class called my error, or else I'll say what application error, right? So let me create the class. So we created the class called application error. So in the application error class, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna introduce the fields that you want to have, right? So I'm gonna have a 2 field. One is actually what the message, and then what the code, right? So I'm gonna introduce what integer code, then private string message, right? So let me generate what the setters and getters for this. So I'm generating the setters and getters for those 2 fields. So that is generated, and now you have to create one more class inside the API package. The class is going to be a error handler service. I'm gonna call it like that, right? So or else I'll call it as what so the class is going to be, so the class is going to be error handler, right? So let me create the class. I'm gonna annotate this class actually what as a controller advice. Then I'm gonna annotate this class actually what rest controller, right? So my error handler has to extend the other class called response entity exception handler, so make sure that that class from this particular package. So now we have to introduce the method. I'm going to introduce the method public response entity. Okay, the response entity, I'm going to pass the application error object. Okay, so I'm going to call this method actually handle customer not found, okay, exception, right? So now this actually takes customer not found exception as an argument. Customer not found exception, right? So then one more argument called what? Web request, right? So we created one method. Let me maximize the screen, right? So we created the method called handle customer not found exception. So we are passing customer not found exception as an argument, as well as web request as an argument. Here what I'm gonna do, I am simply actually going to create the error class, right? So instance of the error class. So what is the class name? It's application. I'm going to call error equal to new application class. Here I'm going to set the error code actually you can set code whatever you want. I'm going to set the code as what? 101. So you can actually maintain your own error code. If this is in the sense you can understand the customer record is not found, so that's up to you, but as of now I'm going with 101. So error message, I'm going to say the error message is actually set message whatever I'll get from if exception. So I'm going to get the message, right? So then I'm going to return the new response entity, right? So here I'm going to pass the error object, comma, I'm going to say HTTP status actually not found. So now here the method actually created. Now we are returning now we created the application error object, then we are passing the error object, then we are returning the response entity. So now once everything is done, so you have to make sure that this particular method is annotated as exception handler annotation along with the customer not found exception class, right? So that means that whenever in your application the customer not found exception it's occurred, so this particular method would be called and then this response would be served to customer. Now if you look at it, we already created the customer not found exception, right? Since we are setting not found here, so there is no need of actually setting the not found here. So now you can remove that. Let me actually optimize the import, so we don't need that at all. So just consider it's a plain exception now, because we are doing all the code, HTTP status code, it's happening in the error handler class, right? So now let me quickly run this application. We'll see what is gonna happen. Here we go, our application is started successfully. Now let's go back to our Postman. Now let me simply trigger this one. Now you can see what we got a customized the error details. We're going to understand how to use the properties in a Spring Boot application, right? So now you can see that we already have the property file called application.property. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add one custom property. I'm going to call this custom property. For example, if you look at it in a previous video, we actually customized the error message, right? Let's go to the application error class. Now you can find only two fields, right? One is the code, another one is the message. Consider I want to introduce one more variable, private string. The field name is details. If the client wants to know more about the error, so they can visit the particular URL, they can get information, right? That's the understanding. So now what I have to do, let me generate the JSON status, generate JSON status. Okay, the JSON status is generated. And now where we are actually constructing this application error, so we are constructing in the error handler class, right? So now if you look at it, so here we are constructing what, the application error object. Now we are setting what, all the appropriate fields, right? Now we introduce one more field called details, right? Set details. In the details, I want to pass what, the URL where customer can go to that URL and then they can see what, the appropriate API documentation, right? So I just want to configure that API documentation URL in the property file. I just want to use that URL into what, this error handler class. Let's see how to do that, right? So I'm going to name this property key is going to be API doc URL. So I'm going to say http://api.localhost.com, for example. Okay, so consider you can update it later as and when we are launching this application, right? So now we have what, this error handler class. Now I'm going to introduce one variable, private string. So I'm going to say what, details, right? So the detail, I want to populate this particular value to this detail variable, right? Later I want to set this variable to this particular attribute, right? So I have to do that. So now in order to do that, you have to use annotation called @value annotation. In the value annotation, $of, in the curly braces, you have to pass what? That property name, right? So what is our property name? It's our API_doc_URL, right? Just pass that. Now you can see what, so we introduced the new field, we added the new property in the property file. We actually what, trying to access the property file using what, the value annotation. Now let's test our application whether this is actually adding at part of the error message or not. Here we go. Our application is started successfully. Now let me go to what, the Postman. So I'm going to hit this particular URL. So I'm going to get what, all the customer. So I'm going to call the URL where the customer is not available. I'm going to request this particular customer ID. It's clear that we don't have that customer ID. So when I sent it, now you can see what, we are getting the customized error message along with what, one more field called detail. But this particular value actually what, we are reading from the property file. We're going to understand how to customize the white label error page in a Spring Boot application. So if you look at it, when you put what, localhost:8080, so you can see what, this white label error. So I don't want, white label error in my application. I want some meaningful message, right? So instead of this one, so how to do that? So go to your IntelliJ. I'm going to start this application. This is already running. So under the API package, I'm going to introduce one more class called maybe home. You can name whatever you want, home. I'm going to annotate it has REST controller. So I'm going to create the one method. The method name is home. I want to return a string message, right? So method is public, right? So now I'm going to annotate this method as actually what, get mapping method. So here I'm going to return saying that application is works, right? So along with that, I just want to print the today date, right? So let me save this. So let me start the application now. Okay, our application is started. Now go to what, the browser. Let me simply refresh this. Now you can see that it prints what, application works along with what, the current date. We're going to understand how to add a filter to the Spring Boot application. Let's see how to do that. So we already have application. Let me simply add a new package. So I'm going to call this package actually what, filter. Inside this package, I'm going to create the class called myFilter_1. So this is my filter, right? So let me add the filter class. So in order to create a filter, of course, you have to implement the interface called filter. So make sure that, the filter you select from javax.servlet package. That's very important. Once that is done, so what you have to do, you have to override a method. So I'm going to override a method called what, doFilter. That should take what, a servlet request as well as servlet response, and then filter chain as an argument, right? Now we are trying to override this method. Inside this method, I'm not going to do any fancy implementation. I'm just simply going to print what, the system.out.println. I'm going to say that the filter one is called, right? So after the filter is called, I just want to continue the process, right? So to do that, what I have to do, filter chain dot. So we have the filter chain object here, instance here. So filter chain dot do filter. Then I'm going to pass what, the servlet request object and servlet response object, right? Once that is done, so what you have to do, just annotate this class as what, the component. Make sure that the component from org spring framework.stereotype. So now let's quickly run this application. We'll see whether our filter is working or not. Here we go. Our application is started. Now let's go to what, let me clear this console, because I'm trying to see the system.out.println here. So now let me actually what, run this application. Now you can see that what, we got a response, but before that, our filter is actually what, called. Now this is how you can actually what, add a filter into a Spring Boot application. So whatever step you want to do it here, yes, you can of course do that. So that's up to you. We successfully created the filter. That seems to be working fine. But let's understand how to handle the multiple filter scenario in a Spring Boot application. So now we already have what, one filter in our application. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this filter, right? So before that, I'm going to rename the filter as what? My filter underscore 2. Let me create one more filter. I'm going to rename it as what, my filter underscore 3. So if you look at it, we have two filters. So my filter 1, so that says what, filter 1 is called. My filter 2, that says what, filter 1 is called. Let me change it as what, filter 2 is called. Likewise, filter 3 is called, right? So now if you look at it, we have what, 3 filters available in our application. But the thing is, how exactly this 3 filter will be called, right? So let's quickly what, rerun this application. We'll see how this filters actually what, behave, right? So we have filter 1, filter 2, filter 3. Now let's see what is the exact sequence, the time of execution, right? Let me clear this console. Let me go to what, the postman. Let me quickly hit this one. Now go back here. Now you can see what, the filter 1 is called, 2 is called, and 3 is called. Okay, now we have a requirement that I want, for example, consider we want a 3 to be called first, 1 to be called second, and this to be called what, last. So I have to do that, right? In order to do that, so let's go back to what, the filter. I'm going to add one more annotation called order annotation. Inside the order annotation, I'm going to say what, my filter should be called what, second. The sequence of this filter actually what, 2. Order annotation. The sequence of this filter actually what, 3. And then sequence of this filter actually what, 1. Now you can see that this is going to be the 1, this is going to be the 2, and then this is going to be what, 3. So what is the expected output? So 3, 1, and 2, right? So let's see whether that is happening or not. Let me rerun the application. So now our application is started. Let me clear this console. Let me go back to what, the postman. I'm simply triggering this API. Let's see. Here we go. We got what, 3, 1, 2. Let's quickly understand how to customize the URL pattern of the filter in Spring Boot application, right? So to do that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the new filter. I'm going to call this filter actually what, my new filter. Okay, let it be like this. Now obviously we have to implement the filter, make sure that the filter actually belongs to what, javax.servlet package. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to override the method called doFilter. So then in a simple system.out.println, I'm going to say what, the new filter is called. Okay, very simple. Now what I'm going to do, filter chain dot do filter. I'm going to pass what, servlet request, then servlet response. Then I'm going to annotate this filter class actually what, component, right? So that is done. So what we have to do now, we have to configure the URL pattern for this particular filter. So I have to do that. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the new package. I'm going to create the package called config. So inside the config, I'm going to create, the class called my filter config, right? So that is a class. I'm going to annotate this class actually what, configuration, because it's a configuration class. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the bean for filter registration. So let's see how to do that, So I'm going to create the method public filter registration bean. So that actually takes what, the generic argument. I'm going to pass what, generic argument as what, my new filter. So I'm going to call this method actually what, register bean, right? So I just want to annotate this actually what, bean, because what exactly I'm trying to do, I'm going to create the filter bean using what, method, right? Filter registration bean. I'm going to pass what, my new filter. So I'm going to say registration bean equal to new filter registration bean. Okay, so here I'm going to return the same registration bean. Before going to return, I have to set few configurations. So I have to do that. Registration bean dot set filter. First of all, you have to set the filter, right? So I'm going to set the filter as actually what, my new filter. So once that is done, then registration bean dot add URL pattern, right? In the URL pattern, I'm going to say this filter is applicable only for this specific URL. That's it, right? So it's a customers, right? Customers URL. That's it. So let me save this. Let me actually what, go back to our main application. Let's run this. We'll see what's going to happen. Here we go. Our application actually what, started successfully. Now what I'm going to do, I am going to clear this console. Let me actually go to what, the Postman. I'm just simply going to request this particular URL, right? So it says what, application works. So now go back to what, this one. Now you can see what, only this whatever filter we configured what, previous video, only that is actually what, executed, right? So now let me clear the console again. Let me go back to what, this one. I'm gonna call what, customers now. Now let me trigger this one. Now I can get the list of customer. If you go and see the console, now you can see what, along with the previous filter, the new filter also what, triggered. But this filter will be triggered only when this particular URL pattern actually what, match. We're going to learn how to secure our Spring Boot application. See, in a Spring Boot framework, there are a lot of ways to what, secure the application. So in this tutorial, we're going to learn one of the simplest way to what, secure our Spring Boot application. So to do that, so let's go to what, pom.xml. So we have to add what, one dependency, the dependency called Spring Boot Starter Security dependency. So once that is added, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to simply run this application. Here we go. Now our application actually what, started. After adding the security artifact in our Spring Boot application, we just started what, our Spring Boot application, right? So now let me go to what? The localhost 8080. Now you can see what, we got the default login page. So whenever you add what, the Spring Boot security dependency in your Spring Boot application, you will get what, something like this. So what exactly this actually? So this is actually what, provided some user password, right? Let me copy this password, right? So let me go back to this login page. The default username actually what, user, and then the password actually what, whatever password is provided. Let me simply actually what, sign in. Now you can see what, our application actually works. So now you can request what, the customer URI. You can see what we got the response. We successfully added simple security to our application. But you may have a question, how to customize the username and password? Since that is actually provided by default in your Spring Boot application, right? Is there a possibility to customize that? Yes, there is a way. So in order to do that, you go to what, your Spring Boot application. Under the config folder, I'm going to create what, new class. I'm going to call this class actually what, security config, right? So I'm going to annotate this class actually what, configuration, as well as my class has to extend the class called web security configure adapter, right? Once that is extended, we have to override a method called user detail service. By overriding this user detail service, you can actually customize your username and password, as well as you can add what, the number of user you want, right? So I'm going to override this method. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to even annotate this method actually what, bean, because we're going to override and then I want the bean to be created and then this to be referred in a Spring Boot application. So let me remove the default implementation. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do what? Password encoder equal to password encoder factories dot create password encoder, right? Once that is done, what I'm going to do, I'm going to what, build the user. So in order to build the user, what we can do, so user dot user builder equal to, I'm going to say what, user builder equal to user.builder dot password encoder. We're gonna pass what in encoder colon, I'm gonna do the encode. So that means I'm getting the default encoder. I'm setting the default password encoder to the user builder object. Once that is done, so I'm gonna create the user. In order to create the user, I'm gonna do user details. So I'm gonna say user 1 equal to user builder dot. So I'm gonna pass the username as what? My user. I'm gonna pass the password actually what? Password. Right? Then I'm gonna set the roles. The role is going to be user role. So please make sure that is a capital letter. It's user, then build. So one user is created. Likewise, I'm gonna create one more user. So user detail. So user 2 equal to user builder dot username. You have to set the username, another username. I'm gonna call my user 1, maybe 2. I'll call this user 1. So my user 1 and then my user 2, then password. I'm gonna call the password password. You can change the password accordingly. User as well as admin. Right? Let's take string array. Now I'm going to call build method. Now we created two users. Now what I'm going to do, return new in memory manager. I'm going to pass user 1 as well as user 2. So how many user you have, right? You can pass all the user, right? So in memory user detail is nothing but the Spring Boot actually manage these information in the in-memory database. So if you want to customize the database, you can do that. There are a lot of options available. So as of now, we customized our user information as well as I added one more user, right? So let me actually simply run this application. We'll see what is going to happen. Here we go. Now our application started successfully. There is no default password is provided. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm going to actually refresh the screen. I got the login screen. So what is our username? So the first username actually what? My user 1 and then password, right? So let me try with that. So my user 1 then password. Here we go, right? That actually works successfully. So we successfully customized the username and password in the Spring Boot application. Now let's actually do the same testing in our Postman tool. Let's see how to do that. So when I actually trigger this customer, it says the unauthorized. So how to do authorization. So now go to authorization. You have option called base auth. So now you have to pass my user 1 then the password, right? So let me actually trigger this. Now you can see we got the customer information. If you see the request, we are sending authorization as a header. For the authorization, we are sending basic plus along with some token. What exactly this token is? See, this token is nothing but base64 format. It is representing the username and then password. So instead of actually sending the username and password, what you can do, you can always actually copy this basic token. You can actually set it in the request header. It has an authorization. You can send it for all the requests. You don't have to do authentication, something like this. So this is the alternative way. We successfully created our Spring Boot application and then we added the few APIs to it and then we secured that Spring Boot application as well. Now it's time to deploy the Spring Boot application in the cloud. Now let's see. Before that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the repository in the GitHub. So I'm going to push this code toward the GitHub. Then from there we will take the code and then we'll deploy it in the cloud. So let's see how to do that. So in order to do that, go to a browser. I'm going to simply type github.com. Once that is done, you can see the login sign up screen. So I'm going to do sign in because I already have an account. So I'm going to create sign in. So I'm going to say my mail ID dineshkrish.com, right? So my password obviously. So once that is done, now you can see we came to our main dashboard, right? So let me go to my profile. So I'm gonna create the new repository. Let me click the repositories. Here you can find the new option. Click the new repository. I'm gonna name this repository as CMS, right? Customer Management System, right? So the description is going to be Customer Management System, right? So that's my repository name. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to actually what, make it as a public. If you want to switch to the private, you can do that. So probably in order to do that, you have to subscribe, you have to pay some subscription fees to get the private account. So I'm going with the public because I want to share this code publicly. So create repository. Now we see that our repository actually what created successfully. We just created what the repository. Now it's time to push our code into this repository. So to do that, just let me what copy this particular link. Go to what your IntelliJ. So what I'm gonna do, if you right click the project, you should see what the Git option here. Now if you don't see the Git option, so what you have to do probably, so you have to click on this project. Just go to what VCS. That means what version control system. Now you have to enable what the version control system for this particular project, right? So I'm enabling the version control system. You have to select what repository system you want to use, right? I'm gonna want to use what Git. So once that is done, just give OK. So now you can see what the Git repository will be supported. Now what I'm gonna do, let me right click on the project here. Now you can see what Git option. So I'm gonna click on what the commit directory. Just click on the commit directory. So here I'm gonna select all the file. I'm gonna say what customer management system with Spring Boot, right? So very simple commit message. I'm gonna say what simply commit. Now the file would be committed. It will take some time, so that's performing the code analysis, everything. Now the file is actually what getting committed. So commit. Now you can see what the 24 file committed, the customer management system with Spring Boot. That is a commit message, right? So once that is done, so what I have to do, let me actually what push this code into what repo, right? So to do that, again go to what Git. Now repository, you have to select option called what push. Now let me click on it. Now you have to see what where you want to push your code, right? The Git is asking, please define what the remote, right? So we already created what the remote repository, right, with the GitHub. So let me copy this link again. So I'm going to define the remote. So here I'm gonna simply paste what that URL. Once that is done, just simply give what OK. Now it will say I'm gonna push what this particular files to the repo, right? Now let me simply click what push. So you can see what the push actually what succeeded. Here we go. Now you can see what all the files actually what came to our Git repository. So far we successfully created one simple Spring Boot application called customer management system, and we actually pushed the same into what the Git repository. Now this is time to understand how to deploy this application into the cloud, right? So now as part of this tutorial, I'm going to use what one of the cloud service called Heroku, right? So the Heroku is kind of what the free version. It has some free version with a limited access. We're just going to use it actually for what the demo purpose, right? So let me actually what go to the new tab. I'm actually going to Heroku.com. So now you can see what I am actually went into what the dashboard. The reason what I already logged in, actually I already created what account, which is very straightforward. You can definitely do that. So once your account is successfully created, so now you should see what this particular dashboard. Here you can see what you don't have any app yet, right? So now create the app. I'm going to name this app actually what DK Dinesh Krishnan CMS. Cool. This particular URL is available, right? So the closed region, so I'm gonna my closed region actually what Europe. So I'm actually what selecting that is a closed region. Now create app. You can see what the app is created. Once the app is created, now what you have to do, you have to deploy your code into this application, right? So how to do that? Here you can see what the various type of deployment method. One is actually Heroku, Git commit, and then what a container registry. You can do a lot of things, but we have all our code into the Git repository, right? So we have to connect with what Git repository. So click on what connect Git repository. Now you can see what so once you click on it, it will ask you to what log in with your Git account. So I already done it, so you should get the pop-up. You can actually what do that. That's very simple process. So now you have to search your repo name. So what is our repo name? The repo name is actually what CMS, right? So let me simply what CMS, right? I'm gonna search. Now you can see what the CMS repo is available. I'm gonna simply what do the connect. Now you can see what our repo actually connected with what? The Heroku. Now I have to deploy this particular repo. Now you have option called what? Manual deploy. If you want to add a CI/CD pipeline, you can do that, but I don't want to do it as of now. You have option called manual deploy. So deploy with the grid branch, right? What is our branch? So we have only one branch called what? Master. I'm going to simply deploy the master branch. Just click deploy branch. Once that is done, it will start what? The deployment process. You can see what? The Java app is detected. Installing what? 1.8. It will download all the necessary dependency for your Spring Boot applications. So let's wait for a while. So now it says what? Our build is succeeded. So we don't have any problem with our build, right? Now it says what? Once all the build process is done, it says what? Your application is successfully deployed, right? Your app was successfully deployed. Now let's see whether app is running or not. Here we go, our app is running, right? So what is the username, right? So our username is actually myuser1. So what is the password? The password actually what? Password, right? Simply sign in. Oh cool, it's signed in. Now let's actually what? Call the customers API. So now our application is successfully started. So now you can actually what? Play with your application in the cloud. Thanks for watching.